the eternal voice.
If you find value in quiet journeys through forbidden libraries and midnight theaters, subscribe and keep the lantern trimmed. The promise is simple. By the end of this exploration, you will recognize the small rituals that let the mythos seep from paper into plastic, from tabletop into code, from ink into light. You will hold a controller and know it as a sigil. You will touch a keyboard and feel the grain of a door that opens both ways. The premise is not that games adopted Lovecraft's names, though they did. The premise is that games discovered his law, knowledge as contagion, curiosity as key and gate, the stage of reality as curtain and abyss. A rulebook is not a text, but a mask you agree to wear. A console is not a machine, but a black mirror that agrees to watch you back. In that exchange, something older than genre and longer than franchise takes a seat in the audience. Listen, the sound of dice like rain on a tin roof, the hush of carpeted basements where the first foggy maps were sketched in pencil, corners smudged by careful fingers, a name whispered, Chaosium, 1981. Call of Cthulhu, the sanity track, a slender filament, a fragile wick, the revolutionary idea that knowing too much sets the room on fire, that every successful investigation check costs fragments of your humanity. This was the fundamental inversion that would echo through decades of game design. Traditional role-playing rewarded knowledge with power, discovery with advancement. Cosmic horror gaming made knowledge itself dangerous, each revelation a small death of innocence. Players learned to measure curiosity in dice rolls and pencil marks, discovered that investigation was not heroic but metabolic, a slow burning of mental resources. The keeper sat behind a screen not as adversary, but as curator of consequence, dispensing revelation and madness in equal measure. From those tables through the mouths of keepers and the margins of fanzines, the transmission begins. Through ports and translations, floppy disks and gray cartridges into cities built of polygons and corridors built of static, alone in the dark, the lurking horror, eternal darkness, save files that flicker like candles in a draft, menus that lie, audio that cracks like ice on a black river. The lurking horror translated the keeper's voice into text parsers that responded with clinical precision, describing unspeakable horrors in measured academic tones. Alone in the Dark pioneered spatial horror through fixed cameras that forced players to experience space from predetermined perspectives, creating the sensation of being observed by unseen intelligences. Pre-rendered backgrounds hid architectural impossibilities, while tank controls made every movement deliberate, ritualistic. The mansion breathed with malevolent intelligence, reshaping itself according to logic human minds could only partially comprehend. The mythos in gaming is not merely tentacles or unpronounceable names. It is the structural pose of a game that asks you to look, then punishes the looking. It is fog of war as merciful veil. It is the locked archive at the heart of a city you can walk but never own. It is the rhythm of discovery and cost, the design principle that your knowledge acts upon you even as you act upon it. These early digital implementations established vocabulary that would inform decades of development. Save files became grimoires, recording descent into forbidden knowledge. Loading screens became moments of ritual preparation, brief pauses before crossing thresholds into spaces where conventional logic held no sway. User interfaces began incorporating elements of uncertainty, health bars that might lie, maps that revealed their incompleteness, inventory systems that suggested the presence of objects too terrible to display. The stakes are not moral but metabolic. We play to sleep deeper, to place our anxieties on rails and watch them pass under the wheels. Cosmic horror in games works because the system can be learned and lost. because fail states are rehearsals for oblivion, because the darkness at the edge of the map is not only fog, but the space where your story ends and the world's continues, indifferent as tide under stars. We will trace this lineage from green felt tables to glossy disc boxes, from cardboard sigils to bureaucratic liturgy, from the euphoria of gaining insight to the nausea of watching reality unravel. You too are in this lineage. You too have rolled to remember and stepped into rooms with no corners. The curtain lifts again, the stage empty and full, because it always begins at the table. Before the monitor, before the terminal's green glow, there was the book. Chaotic, luminous, officious in the way sacred texts pretend not to be. Call of Cthulhu 1981 with RuneQuest's bones beneath its skin and Sandy Peterson's voice drifting through paper like smoke through shuttered rooms. Investigators, not heroes. Pistols that jam, professors who panic, sanity points written in pencil because ink would be hubris. What transforms a rulebook into grimoire is not lore but posture. It tells you the world operates under laws you cannot see, then asks you to act as if you do. The keeper is not villain but stagehand, pulling ropes to raise and lower weather, fog, and the occasional city. Players bring torches, the keeper brings darkness. Between the two, the shape of story appears like breath on glass. This collaborative approach established gaming's first true inversion of heroic fantasy. Traditional role-playing celebrated accumulation of power, the steady march from weakness to godhood. Cosmic horror demanded different mathematics, where knowledge was currency that burned as it was spent. Character sheets became medical records tracking gradual dissolution. The dice became oracles dispensing revelation and madness in equal measure. Tabletop codified cosmic horror as procedure. Roles to remember, roles to forget. Costs that carry forward like injuries in wet boots. Failure becomes flavor, not dead end. A missed clue is not block but bruise that blooms into paranoia. Later designers, Robin D. Laws with Gumshoe, Kenneth Haidt with Trail of Cthulhu, made explicit what early tables learned by superstition. Investigative play flows when knowledge is key and gate, when the veil lifts predictably but never safely. The Gumshoe system revolutionized investigative gaming by ensuring core clues were always found, shifting focus from whether information was discovered to what price was paid for acquisition. This mechanical philosophy acknowledged that cosmic horror thrived on revelation, not obstruction. The question was never whether investigators would uncover truth, but whether they would survive the uncovering with sanity intact. The mechanical philosophy spread like contagion through gaming culture. Delta Green, 1997, moved the ritual from dusty basements to fluorescent corridors, federal seals stamped on impossible dust jackets. The ink colder, paper thinner, cost higher because now bureaucracy understands the mythos is not story problem but logistics problem. Even dice learn to speak in acronyms. Even masks wear badges. Delta Green demonstrated how cosmic horror could infect institutional structures, transforming government agencies into unwitting cults, serving entities they could never comprehend. Players embodied federal agents who understood their duty, required acts that would damn their souls, all in service of preventing greater horrors from awakening. Sanity mutated into paperwork, bonds frayed. You could measure cost in lost weekends and ruined marriages, in hollowed sleep at dawn. Sanity as currency becomes defining mechanic, but it proxies attention itself. The more precisely your mind outlines phenomenon, the more precisely phenomenon outlines you. The table becomes theater in the round where audience is cast, stage is map, props become doorways. When session ends, the room stays quiet. Fog in hallway tastes of cardboard and dust, and something has shifted. Play is not escape, but rehearsal. Board games inherit these ritual drums. Arkham Horror, 1987, revitalized 2005. Mansions of Madness, 2011. Cooperative Dread sets new timbre. Against the indifferent city, you are small choir. Movement points like heartbeats. Doom tracks like frost under locked doors. You spend clues like sailors spend daylight in storms. Precious, measured, never enough. Everything tastes of water under stars. The transition to board games required translating atmospheric horror into mechanical precision. Doom tracks became countdown timers to apocalypse, while clue tokens transformed abstract investigation into tangible resource management. Players learned to balance immediate needs against long-term survival, knowing every action brought the Ancient One closer to awakening. The cooperative framework emphasized humanity's collective fragility against cosmic indifference. Arkham Horror's iterations teach procedurals, dread through day-night cadence, event decks as oracles, economy of clues and spells. The Ancient One sleeps, while doom accumulates. Not villain, but inevitable conclusion. Cosmic alarm clock counting down to awakening that will unmake everything. Players race not toward victory, but toward postponement. Temporary reprieve from universal dissolution. This is how the virus travels, not from proper noun on page 312, but from practice. Design treating knowledge as living reagent, mystery as resource economy. This practice is portable, can live in silicon, survive translation to pixels. The grimoire doesn't resist duplication because its power lies not in glyphs, but in agreement that glyphs are doors. The procedural nature of tabletop cosmic horror made it uniquely adaptable to digital translation. Dice rolls, resource tracking, and consequence management could be automated without losing essential character. More importantly, the collaborative atmosphere of shared dread could be maintained even in single-player experiences through careful design that made the computer itself feel like keeper, dispensing revelations with algorithmic precision. Everything that matters in the mythos arrives on foot, walking through photocopied zines stapled crooked, traveling in convention air thick with sweat, ink, and plastic. It migrates via software cassette and bulletin board systems, humming like beehives behind doors marked knock twice, then once. The Lovecraftian posture crosses media because it is light, adhering where appetite for puzzle meets permission for risk. The transmission happens in spaces between official channels. Fanzines like The Unspeakable Oath and Dagon carry more than scenarios. They carry atmosphere, teaching game masters how to pace revelation, how to make silence work as hard as screaming. Convention hotel rooms become laboratories where keepers share techniques for making players complicit in their own dread. The knowledge spreads through handshakes and hushed conversations, through demo games that run past midnight in carpeted corridors that smell of industrial coffee and accumulated exhaustion. In the 80s, text adventures like Infocom's The Lurking Horror, 1987, inherit the keeper's voice. The parser becomes GM, precise, cold, describing darkness with naturalist patience. Corridor damp, stain seeping, mask hung on nail with no shadow. You type verbs like prayers, look, open, listen. When the game answers, you sense the human behind it. Voice in the wall, speaking the unspeakable through the limitation of text, forcing imagination to populate darkness with personal fears. The Lurking Horror demonstrated how computational limitation could amplify rather than diminish cosmic horror. The parser's rigid vocabulary forced players to think carefully about each action, while the text-only interface required imagination to construct the very spaces being explored. Every room description became collaborative effort between programmer and player, with fear emerging from gaps between words. The game's academic setting, a university basement during winter storm, grounded supernatural horror in familiar institutional spaces, making impossible feel inevitable. By 1992, Alone in the Dark translates posture into space. Fixed cameras, narrow halls, a mansion breathing like tired animal. Geometry wrong, not because it must be, but because only wrong geometry is memorable. The mythos rides discomfort, player smallness in frame, the stage larger than imagined. The curtain you see is not the curtain. Pre-rendered backgrounds become painted flats hiding deeper stage machinery, while tank controls make every movement deliberate, ritualistic. The revolutionary insight of Alone in the Dark was understanding that player agency could be constrained without feeling punitive. Tank controls forced deliberate movement that transformed simple navigation into ritual performance. Fixed camera angles created theatrical framing that emphasized player vulnerability while hiding potential threats. The mansion itself became character, its impossible architecture serving as physical manifestation of cosmic indifference to human logic. European studios' fairy names into point-and-click reliquaries. Infogram's Shadow of the Comet, 1993. Prisoner of Ice, 1995. Tone moderate, colors like postcards left near windows. Pseudo-academic horror. Archivists, astronomers, officers whose uniforms smell of salt. The shareware era's generosity, pass the disc, pass the dread, operates like cult hospitality. What is ours becomes yours, and what is yours will be ours. These European interpretations established distinctly scholarly approach to cosmic horror, emphasizing research and investigation over action. Shadow of the Comet placed players as photographers, documenting astronomical phenomena, while Prisoner of Ice cast them as naval officers, confronting prehistoric horrors. Both games understood that cosmic horror worked best when protagonists were educated professionals whose expertise made them uniquely vulnerable to truths beyond human comprehension. Meanwhile, Dungeons & Dragons adjusts its mask edition by edition, courting aberrations and great old patronage. Mind flayers whose cities are syllogisms in stone. Elsewhere, in Tamriel, Hermaeus Mora spreads inked tendrils through cold green seas of pages, his black books whispering that knowledge is library drowning you gently. The old gods set roots under perpetual storms, making raid mechanics into liturgy, group play into worship of incomprehensible entities whose defeat is temporary, whose influence permanent. The absorption of mythos elements into mainstream fantasy gaming demonstrated portable nature of cosmic horror principles. D&D's aberrations became manifestations of alien logic that challenged traditional heroic assumptions. The Elder Scrolls series integrated Daedric princes as cosmic forces beyond moral categories, while MMO raid encounters transformed group combat into ritualistic performances where precise coordination was required to prevent reality-threatening catastrophes. Translations carry more than words. They carry pacing, teaching players to accept opacity as texture, unanswered questions as legitimate endings. Designers learn withholding tooltips can be merciful, that maps with fog are contracts, that fonts matter, serifs like teeth, sans like rain. The drift continues through horror forums, swapping save files like relics, Japanese developers absorbing and bending posture into body horror and dream logic, Western indies returning to zines with Adobe replacing Xerox. The international migration of these concepts created fascinating mutations. Japanese developers transformed cosmic horror through cultural filters that emphasized psychological dissolution and body horror. European studios maintained focus on historical and academic settings, while American indies began experimenting with procedural generation and emergent narrative techniques. Each cultural translation preserved essential DNA while adapting to local aesthetic and narrative traditions. The channel widens, then deepens. The river remains the same, curiosity downstream, coast upstream, the delta green with reeds. When floodplain broadens enough, the AAA cathedral begins rising. But first, we trace how these early digital sigils establish the architecture of interactive dread. To understand how mythos functions in games, set aside monster and pick up ledger. The calculus of harm to knowledge is where horror lives. Sanity is obvious device, but true strength lies not in bar that shrinks, but in how bar rearranges choices. If examining sigil costs point, you hesitate. If reading diary grants skill but takes night's sleep, you begin scheduling dread. The transformation of knowledge from reward to risk represents gaming's most profound adaptation of cosmic horror principles. Traditional mechanics taught voracious information seeking. Every book read, every secret uncovered, brought measurable advancement. Cosmic horror inverts this assumption entirely, making curiosity itself dangerous. Players learn to weigh revelation against psychological cost, creating internal economy where investigation becomes careful rationing of mental resources. Darkest Dungeon turns stress into pantheon of small gods. Fear, hopelessness, masochism, resolve. Torches sputter like attention spans. Light level becomes key fitting too many locks. The affliction system weaponizes psychology. Heroes develop phobias, heart conditions, religious mania. Victory Pyrrhic because even success scars the soul. The ancestors' narration drips with inherited curses, ancient evils stirring beneath earth. Futility of heroic endeavor against cosmic scale. The genius lies in granular modeling of psychological deterioration. Characters don't simply lose sanity points. They develop specific neuroses affecting gameplay unpredictably. Heroes become masochistic, benefiting from pain, or develop kleptomania, compelling interaction with dangerous objects. The torch mechanic creates constant tension between visibility and vulnerability, forcing choice between seeing threats and remaining hidden from cosmic attention. Amnesia. The dark descent recasts looking as risk. Monsters erode you if witnessed, so you learn loving darkness like leaking cloak. Sanity manifests through visual distortion, audio hallucination, physical impairment. The game actively punishes combat, emphasizing stealth and flight, reinforcing mythos' principle that violence is futile against true cosmic horror. Your mouse hand becomes nervous confession, every door a gamble with night. By removing combat as viable option, amnesia forces perpetual flight or hide mentality, mirroring cosmic horror protagonists' fundamental powerlessness. Sanity manifests through increasingly unreliable sensory input. Walls breathe, shadows move independently, interface elements shift when you're not looking. The mouse becomes instrument of reluctant exploration. Each click small act of courage or foolishness. Bloodborne's insight is not currency but tide. High water reveals cities' barnacles, leeches, whiskers. At low tide, ignorance is kindness. The mechanic states thesis. Knowledge is lens burning if held too long. Great ones are not monsters but indifferent cosmic architects whose existence drives humanity to madness and transformation. The hunt becomes liturgy, cathedral becomes laboratory, newborn becomes rune. Insight represents perhaps gaming's most sophisticated implementation of knowledge as corruption. Low insight protects players from seeing certain enemies and environmental details, while high insight reveals cosmic truths, making the world more dangerous. The mechanic creates fascinating tension where players choose between protective ignorance and dangerous enlightenment. Yharnam transforms from Gothic City to cosmic nightmare not through scripted events, but through players' increasing awareness of underlying reality. Eternal darkness, Sanity's requiem pushes boundary where stage meets audience. Sanity effects leak off-screen, inventing errors, sliding volume, erasing saves, feigning television input changes. Game acts like ghost in your house, clarifying contract. Safest transgression is rehearsed. You learn panic can be elicited without harm. Bedtime safe, but not mind safe. Fourth wall breaks made cosmic horror feel genuinely supernatural. When the game pretended to delete save files or displayed fake error messages, it created moments where players questioned boundary between game world and reality. These effects worked by exploiting player investment in progress and system reliability, creating genuine panic even when players intellectually understood. They experienced designed effects. Fog of War remains merciful invention in design. Honesty admitting world is larger than rendered terrain. Theatrical scrim on which light paints only what's needed. Remove it and player's mind lacks projection space for dread. Increase it and pacing collapses into tedium. Fog is negotiation, also mask. The psychological function extends beyond simple gameplay mechanic. It provides essential space for imagination to operate, allowing players to project fears onto unknown spaces. Optimal implementation maintains balance between revelation and concealment, creating collaborative relationship where both designer and player contribute to horror experience. Non-Euclidean geometry, unreliable maps, mutating UI, corrupting language. These are stagecraft, not gimmicks. In Control's oldest house, corridors rearrange like flats pushed by unseen grips. In Soma, identity questions are not essay prompts but timers ticking beneath submarine glass. Mechanics operate like props handed to actors discovering weight mid-scene. Throughout, second person persists. You choose to see and are seen. You lift lantern and are lit. You read sign and are signed. Cannot say game did this to you. You consented, pressed start. Contract thrilling and binding, reason you return. Cardboard has its own weather. In Arkham, fog is matte, corners curl like autumn leaves, tokens clink like distant church bells. What Fantasy Flight and predecessors refined was not lore but appetite, taste of being small together. Against gate openings and doom tracks, you gather in 2s and 4s and 6s, bodies leaning inward, breath frosting same winter window. The city is hungry. Clues are calories. You are single organism with dozen hands. The tactile nature of board gaming amplifies cosmic horror through physical ritual. Components become relics handled with appropriate reverence. Dice rolled with careful attention to their bounce and settle. Cards drawn with anticipation, mounting like pressure behind glass. The shared space creates intimate theater, where every player becomes both performer and audience, watching expressions change as doom accumulates, hearing sharp intakes of breath when Ancient One stirs closer to awakening. This collective vulnerability transforms mere components into living ceremony. Arkham Horror's iterations teach procedural dread, day-night cadence, event decks as oracles, economy of clues and spells, attrition that feels like running in marsh water. The Ancient One sleeps, while doom accumulates. Not villain but inevitable conclusion. Cosmic alarm clock counting down to awakening that will unmake everything. Players race not toward victory but toward postponement. Temporary reprieve from universal dissolution. The game's central innovation lies in reframing victory as postponement rather than triumph. Traditional board games build toward decisive conquest, but Arkham Horror teaches different mathematics where success means delaying inevitable catastrophe. The doom track becomes universal timer, each tick bringing reality closer to dissolution. Players learn to measure progress in gates closed rather than enemies defeated, understanding their role as temporary guardians rather than conquering heroes. Each turn becomes desperate calculus, risk sanity for vital clue, or conserve dwindling resources in vain hope of quieter moment. Eldritch horror broadens stage, stretching canvas over globe so seas become corridors, ports become wings. Mysteries span continents while investigators travel between Cairo and Tokyo, battling unique horrors in exotic locales. The global scale amplifies futility. Individual struggle becomes tiny spark against cosmic conflagration. Narrative cards serve as miniature forbidden texts, each revealing another facet of encroaching horror. The expansion from single city to worldwide threat demonstrates how cosmic horror scales with scope. Individual investigators become even more insignificant against global catastrophe, their travels between continents highlighting vast distances and isolation. Mystery cards function as serialized horror fiction, each encounter contributing to a larger narrative of cosmic awakening. The game teaches that horror grows not through escalation but through accumulation, small revelations building toward unbearable truth. Mansions of Madness shifts keeper into app. Backstage manager with infinite patience and exact timing. You lift cardboard revealing tile, lift tile revealing text, lift text revealing pressure on ribcage like hand. The digital keeper never tires, never forgets, maintains perfect dramatic timing while human players stumble through scenarios designed to break them psychologically as much as strategically. The hybrid digital-physical approach represents evolutionary step in cooperative horror design. The app handles complex calculations and timing while preserving tactile satisfaction of physical components. More importantly, it creates perfect keeper, entity with infinite patience for dramatic timing, never forgetting details, never accidentally revealing information prematurely. Players experience pure investigation without metagaming concerns about human keeper limitations. What these games demonstrate, cosmic horror thrives in logistics, tickets, tokens, tracks, players feeding clues into common pool like tributaries, dice as weather, time as enemy not villain, city becomes character because city regulates flows, monster movement, clue appearance, doom decay. You learn reading board like river chart, learn ignoring rain that never stops. The logistical complexity mirrors real-world experience of managing crisis. Multiple systems demanding attention simultaneously, resources never quite sufficient, time always running out. Players develop expertise in reading board state like meteorologists reading weather patterns, understanding that success requires managing flows rather than achieving objectives. The city operates as regulatory system, controlling pace and intensity through mechanical precision that feels like bureaucracy of hunger. Board game design prototypes, feast famine cycle digital games. Take into services, gate opens, resources burn hot, then lull. Lull is not mercy but setup, soft footstep on stage. Even loss is textured, finales where doom crowns, and you fall with tone of bell struck underwater. Players pack pieces with ritual care, bagging sigils, stacking signs, wiping wine drop from card reading like curse. The cardboard houses teach lesson many AA titles forget. Spectator experience is part of design. Always audience, even if just 4 players watching die bounce. Always curtain, even if just lid. When houses rebuild in code, curtains become menus, loading screens, tooltips that are prayers. The fridge light clicks on, disc spins, city becomes texture streaming, cardboard fog becomes particle systems, same wind, new weather. The cooperative dread learned around tables prepares players for digital cathedrals, where fog is rendered in real time, but hunger remains the same. We dim room and let CRT hum. Text crawls like frost along pane. The lurking horror asks for verbs with dignity, never pleading, never joking. Tells you what you smell, dust, ozone, coffee left too long, and what you cannot see. You type with confidence of someone opening boxes in stranger's attic. The addict notices, responds through parser that become digital keeper, precise and cold. The text adventure format proved ideal for cosmic horror because limitation forced collaboration between machine and imagination. Infocom's masterpiece understood that the most potent horror resided not in what was seen, but in what was imagined. The parser's rigid vocabulary created ritualistic communication where players learned to speak in acceptable verbs: look, open, listen, examine, each command a small prayer to an algorithmic deity. Every typed word was ritual incantation, every response cryptic oracle from unseen entity. The game's clinical descriptions of decay and dread made mundane terrifying, anchoring abstract horror in concrete sensory detail. Fear blossomed in gaps between sentences where player memory supplied what flashlight could not illuminate. The 90s translate ritual into motion. Alone in the Dark is museum of wrong furniture, wardrobes that breathe, windows refusing to be windows, piano with notes stuck like fishbone. Fixed cameras force you to be watched from above, framing body as evidence. These are not jump scares, but topology horrors. You are on stage but do not know exits. Pre-rendered backgrounds hide deeper machinery. Tank controls make movement deliberate, ritualistic. Frederick Reynal's revolutionary design understood that player agency could be constrained without feeling punitive when constraints served atmospheric purpose. Fixed camera angles created theatrical framing that emphasized vulnerability while hiding potential threats just beyond vision's edge. Tank controls transformed simple navigation into deliberate performance, making every movement weighty and considered. The mansion itself became character through impossible, architecture suggesting intelligence behind construction. Rooms connecting incorrectly, corridors leading where they shouldn't. Furniture arranged by alien logic. Pre-rendered backgrounds operated like painted theatrical flats, hiding stagehands who could slide walls an inch when you weren't looking. Eternal darkness. Sanity's requiem pushes boundary where stage meets audience. Sanity effects leak off-screen, inventing errors, sliding volume, erasing saves, feigning television input changes. Game acts like ghost in your house, clarifying contract. Safest transgression is rehearsed. You learn panic can be elicited without harm. The "this controller is not connected" message while you hold working controller. Fourth wall doesn't just break, it hemorrhages. Silicon Knight's masterpiece represented quantum leap in interactive horror design. By making game appear to malfunction in response to characters' deteriorating sanity, it created moments where players questioned boundary between game world and reality. These effects worked because they exploited player investment in system reliability and save file security. When game pretended to delete progress or displayed fake error messages, it created genuine panic even among players who intellectually understood they experienced design defects. The haunted object became not statue in corridor, but console under television. Shadow of the comet and prisoner of ice thread historical texture through puzzles. Salt smell in harbor town, pen scratch in ledger, lamp oils slow death on winter pier. They trade in scholarship. Mythos becomes file room too full to close. Players' curiosity becomes filing error growing into audit. Point-and-click mechanics make investigation methodical, archaeological. Every pixel might hide revelation or damnation. These European interpretations established scholarly approach, emphasizing research and historical investigation. Infograms understood that cosmic horror worked best when protagonists were educated professionals whose expertise made them uniquely vulnerable to truths beyond human comprehension. Point-and-click mechanics reinforced archaeological metaphor, making every interaction feel like careful excavation of dangerous knowledge. Players clicked not to conquer but to catalog, and cataloging itself felt like summoning paper moths from dim files. By early 2000s, different rhythm arrives. Frictional's amnesia forces you to carry lantern like nervous confession. Mouse hand becomes lock-picking of fear. To open door is to push luck with night. Mechanic teaches shape of breath. Long in darkness, short in light. Measured in heartbeats, you start hearing. Sanity manifests through visual distortion. Walls breathing, shadows moving independently, interface elements shifting when you're not looking. Amnesia refined psychological horror through elegant light-darkness mechanic, creating constant tension between visibility and vulnerability. By removing combat entirely, it forced players into perpetual vulnerability state. The mouse became instrument of reluctant exploration, each click representing small act of courage or foolishness. Players learn to ration light like precious resource while managing protagonists' deteriorating mental state through increasingly unreliable sensory input. Call of Cthulhu, Dark Corners of the Earth, attempts most direct translation of tabletop experience. Sophisticated sanity system manifests through visual distortions, auditory hallucinations, physical impairments. Game punishes combat, emphasizes stealth and flight. Innsmouth's decrepit streets, submarine depths, oppressive isolation, all anchors grounding abstract terror in concrete experience. Along the way, lexicon expands, save points as sanctuaries, audio logs as rosaries. Game space reasserts as theater with tight wings, carefully masked backstage corridors. Player learns trusting fog, respecting employees' only sign, interpreting scuff marks as stage notes for scene that hasn't happened yet. Into this space stride larger budgets and new architectures. Cathedral of AAA with stonework crafted by teams whose credits roll longer than sermons. Principles won't change. Pots will be larger. Broth will be same salt. When budgets swell, temptation is polishing away splinters, but splinters are where dread lives. Best of big houses remember this. Bloodborne builds city whose every street is thesis, hunt as liturgy, cathedral as laboratory, newborn as rune. Insight calibrates player perception. Cloth, stone, moonlight conspire to change mind, then world. Bosses are not creatures, but arguments ending in screams. From Software's masterpiece demonstrates how cosmic horror enhances rather than undermines action gameplay. The insight mechanic creates fascinating tension where players choose between protective ignorance and dangerous enlightenment. Low insight shields from certain enemies and environmental details, while high insight reveals cosmic truths, making the world more dangerous. Yharnam transforms from Gothic City to cosmic nightmare, not through scripted events, but through players' increasing awareness of underlying reality. The Great Ones function as indifferent cosmic architects, whose mere existence drives humanity to madness and transformation. Each boss encounter becomes philosophical confrontation with alien intelligence. Victory Pyrrhic because defeating Avatar never touches principle it represents. On nearby avenue, Federal Building hums with fluorescent hymns. Control assembles archive of altered objects, each mask remembering face. Bureau's bureaucracy becomes ritual of containment and naming. Oldest house rearranges rooms like stage trying different sets for same play. Papers flutter, red chords sing, concrete sweats. Player walks as both agent and audience. Badge is mask and mirror. Remedy Entertainment perfected bureaucratic horror by making paperwork feel like incantation. The Federal Bureau of Control operates as organization whose primary function is cataloging incomprehensible phenomena through clinical documentation. Altered objects become relics whose mundane appearances hide reality warping properties, while objects of power serve as focal points for paracausal forces. The oldest house demonstrates non-Euclidean architecture through rooms that rearrange based on narrative progression, making space itself unreliable narrator. Jesse's role as director creates perfect metaphor for player agency, authority figure who understands neither her power nor the forces she supposedly controls. Dead Space takes theology and turns it into physics of sculpture, marker whose geometry is sermon. Player's HUD dissolves into suit. Stage removes footlights, calling it immersion. Necromorphs are not monsters but congregants, unified singularity converting flesh into new configurations. The horror structural, not fighting enemies but fighting principle of convergence itself. Visceral Games created theological horror through marker geometry that functions as three-dimensional sermon preaching unity through dissolution. The necromorphs represent not evil but misguided attempt at transcendence, seeking to convert all organic matter into new configurations. Isaac's journey becomes descent into madness as he realizes his engineering expertise makes him uniquely qualified to understand and therefore vulnerable to marker influence. The diegetic HUD integration eliminates traditional interface barriers, creating seamless immersion that makes player complicit in Isaac's psychological deterioration. Open worlds breathe this air too. In Skyrim, Hermaeus Mora's realm is wet green fog, oil on water, pages sticking to hands as if hands were pages, contract clear, knowledge is room with no door behind you. Black books whisper seductively while tentacles write themselves across reality's margins. In Azeroth, old gods speak in mechanics, stack, spread, stand in fire. Raids become choirs, repeating measures until cathedral yields. The integration of cosmic horror into mainstream fantasy demonstrates portable nature of these principles. Hermaeus Mora's Apocrypha represents perfect manifestation of knowledge as trap, infinite library where seeking wisdom becomes form of imprisonment. World of Warcraft's old gods transform raid encounters into liturgical performances where teams must execute precise movements to prevent reality from unraveling. N'Zoth's corruption spreads through game systems themselves. Interface elements shift, audio distorts, familiar mechanics become unreliable. Soma strips away action entirely, focusing on existential questions about consciousness and identity in world where humanity is extinct. Underwater facility becomes philosophical laboratory, where every discovery forces confrontation with nature of self. Bawau's attempts to preserve life result in grotesque parodies of existence, making survival itself questionable goal. Frictional Games created purest expression of philosophical horror by removing traditional gameplay elements entirely. Pathos 2 becomes laboratory for exploring questions of consciousness, identity, and what constitutes authentic existence. The WAUO functions not as villain but as principle of preservation gone mad, creating grotesque parodies of life in desperate attempt to fulfill programming. Simon's journey becomes meditation on continuity of self, each body transfer raising questions about whether consciousness can survive physical death. Cathedral's virtue is resources, vice is certainty. When large games remember leaving maps slightly wrong, scratching panes, letting wind under doors, then Mythos sings rich and low. When they over-explain, song burns out like flash paper. Good teams stage explanations like sunlight in old room, angled, thin, dust motes like stars. You move through these spaces with mask in hand. Sometimes mask is gun, sometimes book, sometimes badge. Whatever it is, it's also key. Keys introduce obligation. If you can open, you must open. AAA Cathedral succeeds when it lets obligation sit like coin on tongue, bright, metallic, bitter. Indies will remind Cathedral of its shadow, but not yet. We stand beneath stained glass watching light bend. Doors are tall, hinges loud, fog rolls under sill. Some furnaces burn hotter because they are small. Sunless sea and sunless skies are written in ink the color of deep water. Sentences taste of salt and lampblack. Map is wound in dark. You carry stories as cargo, watch crew's terror bloom like mildew. Z Captain's log becomes prayer book, each entry marking distance from sanity's shore. Fail Better Games perfected literary horror through procedural storytelling that makes every voyage feel like descent into personal mythology. The Untersee operates as liquid space, where geography follows dream logic rather than cartographic reason. Stories become literal cargo, narrative fragments traded, consumed, or hoarded like precious resources. Each port visit delivers vignettes written with Victorian sensibility that masks cosmic dread beneath mannered prose. Terror accumulates through mundane decisions, eating crew member or starving, investigating strange light or sailing past in protective ignorance. The captain's log transforms into confessional where players record not navigation notes, but psychological deterioration. Cultist Simulator translates ritual into resource, timing, risk. You drag verbs across cards like painting with mercury. Learn some doors open only if you turn your back to them. Card-based mechanics make abstract concepts tangible. Reason, passion, dread become currencies spent in pursuit of ascension or annihilation. The game is pure simulation of mythos core, knowledge as contagion, slow corruption through acquisition of truths, too vast for human comprehension. Weather Factory created most direct translation of occult practice into game mechanics. Cards represent concepts, verbs become actions, performed upon abstract principles. Players learn through experimentation that combining elements produces specific results. Passion plus mystery yields fascination. Fascination plus erudition yields enlightenment. The interface deliberately obscures optimal strategies, forcing personal understanding through trial and error. Success requires balancing multiple resource pools while managing time pressure. The game teaches that occult knowledge operates through pattern recognition rather than logical deduction. Darkest Dungeon teaches attrition as poetry, with barks sounding like prayers, halls smelling of old ropes. Affliction System weaponizes psychology. Heroes develop phobias, heart conditions, religious mania. Ancestors' narration drips with inherited curses, ancient evils stirring beneath earth. Victory Pyrrhic because even success scars soul. Red Hook Studios demonstrated how turn-based combat could become psychological warfare through granular modeling of stress and trauma. Heroes don't simply lose hit points, they develop specific neuroses affecting gameplay unpredictably. The Ancestor's voice provides perfect framing device, transforming dungeon crawling into exploration of inherited guilt. Each expedition becomes careful resource management where torches, food, and sanity must be rationed against unknown dangers. The estate management layer reinforces themes of decay and restoration, making every upgrade feel like temporary reprieve from inevitable collapse. Dredge slips motorboat across water like coin across knuckle. Day is bait, night is net. Fishing mechanics hide cosmic horror beneath mundane surface. Catch wrong fish, and reality starts unraveling. The sinking city lets streets flood, turning urban design into tidal theology. Investigation mechanics borrowed from Call of Cthulhu, but enhanced with environmental storytelling that makes every waterlogged street a clue. Mechanically, small teams experiment where cathedrals hesitate. They erode UI until it becomes weather. They fracture narrative into logs and recipes. They make permadeath essay on grief resetting board without erasing lesson. They trust player to read between damp lines, let silence do more work than strings. Special mention for friction as design. Interface verbs that resist. Doors requiring whole mouse hand to persuade. Pauses feeling like stepping outside into fog. Binding mechanics to metaphor almost too tightly. Hunger meters feeling like prayer beads. Light levels feeling like breath in cold air. Madness arriving as card, not glitch. Independent developers excel at creating meaningful friction. Interface resistance serving atmospheric purpose rather than mere difficulty. When doors require sustained mouse pressure, action becomes ritualistic rather than automatic. Amnesia. The bunker innovates by making monster persistent threat rather than scripted encounter. AI-driven creature responds to player noise, light, movement, creating genuine tension where every action carries risk. The bunker becomes living system where player and monster exist in constant dynamic relationship. Every decision becomes gamble, direct negotiation with primal, indifferent force. Indie crucibles connect back to table through crowdfunding and community devlogs. New fanzines. Players watch stage being built, then step onto it. Curtain is transparent, audience is chorus, ritual is iterative. Mask is still mask, but you can see stitches. It's comforting, like seeing seam on well-worn glove. Lesson they deliver forward is permission. You may leave edges rough, gaps black. You may trust player to bring own candle. With permission reissued, we can speak frankly about design as invocation, about staging unknown without insulting it or audience. Treat game as stage. Treat player as both actor and audience. Treat knowledge as prop that stains. With these three axioms, you can invoke posture without borrowing single noun from Providence. The mastery begins with curtain management. Opening and closing information flows with rhythm precise as heartbeat. Tooltips arrive like whispered cues, never monologues. Fog serves as mercy because it tells truth. You cannot see everything and should not try. Maps that admit ignorance become contracts honored by both designer and wanderer. Silent Hill perfects this through radio static that becomes living curtain, lifting to reveal monsters, falling to hide them. Information transforms into atmosphere, the hiss of vents, distant bells, soft tick of save lamps. Light sketches edges, darkness writes depth. Price the gaze through costed curiosity. Make looking and action with bill attached. Sanity, stress, suspicion, light, heat. Tie cost to systems player already values, so desire becomes lever against itself. Keys must open and wound simultaneously. Bloodborne's insight exemplifies this. Higher awareness reveals cosmic truth but makes world more dangerous. Knowledge literally changes texture of stone and sound of moonlight. The mechanic states simple thesis. Perception is participation, and participation leaves marks the ledger always remembers. At critical junctions, employ second-person implication that looks back with accusatory verbs. You chose to read. You pressed start. You lifted mask, and it fitted your face. Idea acts on you because you acted first. That is the pact. Eternal darkness mastered this mischief, making game seem aware of being played. Sanity bleeding through cables, lies shaped like console warnings. Execute subtler versions. Menus that twitch when you hesitate. Cursors drifting toward doors as if stage-side. Design non-Euclidean flows, extending beyond bent corridors, into loops of consequence returning, altered. Rooms that remember who crossed them. Inventories lying kindly by omission, confessing under pressure. Interfaces flickering only when attention wanders. Weather inside architecture. Control's oldest house demonstrates how space can narrate. Shifting flats like stagehands trying new sets for same doomed play. Teach players that systems are characters with moods. Elevators sulk, stairwells contradict, maps become rumors, buildings tolerate but never endorse. Invite audience into room through spectator moments because people watch one another watching fear. Design die bounces, raid wipes, menu panics, boss runs, feeling like processions beneath stained glass. Phasmophobia understands this alchemy. Proximity chat as candle, whispered coordinates as liturgy, evidence tables as altars. Investigation becomes performance where bravest part is not ghost, but gaze of friends, witnessing you freeze at closet doors. Let time serve as antagonist through lulls that prepare rather than relax. Peaks should arrive, argue, depart before comfort returns. Use silence as instrument, empty chair on stage, staying empty too long. Amnesia teaches through absence. Monster most frightening when consenting to be rumor. Calibrate the metronome, footsteps in next hall, then nothing, then drip, then gasp that might be pipe or prayer. When players learn room breathes, they begin pacing themselves and fear blooms in pauses like dark water. Spice unreality with scholarship. Dates, places, marginalia, footnotes, not exposition dumps, but breadcrumbs with grit. Texture of real cells, weight of unreal. Smudge ink, misfile reports. Photograph shadows stamped with case numbers. Call of Cthulhu. Dark corners of the earth, grounds terrors in municipal rot until impossible feels merely undisclosed. When paperwork buckles, mind accepts something heavier. Then paper stood on it and kept walking. Practice structural horror by treating entities as principles rather than personalities. Monster becomes supply chain, weather system, doctrine pursued until meaning tears. Boss arenas serve as diagrams of failing theses where victory changes you wrong. Soma's WO isn't villain but preservation principle gone mad, making encounters philosophical rather than tactical. When players defeat body but principle persists, they understand real antagonist is rule behind world. Design like ritual. Repeat, escalate, invert. Begin with veil, reveal void. Replace void with different veil. Loop until player understands curtain is content, and lifting it is the play. If you must name, do so sparingly like chalk on wet stone. If you must explain, do so after it hurts. If you must comfort, let it be earned through careful attention to breathing in cold rooms. Carry these forward and you will feel old cold water at ankles, yet still step. Carry these forward and player will arrive at last door, already whispering liturgy of not knowing. Final reveal should be mirror showing mask they chose. Quietly, inevitably, forever again. Why does this feel good? Why do we sleep better after walking through darkness, smelling of wet stone and old vellum? Cosmic horror in games offers controlled burn of curiosity. Psychology calls it epistemic curiosity modulated by cost, arousal tempered by risk. Brains delight in resolving uncertainty nested within body's caution. Games serialize that process, build small furnaces with exhaust fans. The neurochemical dance begins with dopamine seeking patterns in chaos, then cortisol responding to perceived threat. Finally, endorphins rewarding survival of manufactured crisis. Gaming cosmic horror exploits ancient circuitry, creating safe spaces where fight-or-flight responses can fire without consequence. The controller becomes ritual implement, allowing controlled activation of stress systems, while screen provides necessary distance between stimulus and self. We practice dying without stakes, rehearse panic without penalty. Playing cosmic horror is ritualized exposure therapy. You choose powerlessness within bounded frame, practice tolerating not knowing without disintegrating. Rehearsed panic metabolizes into narrative memory which brain files under survived. Next day's meeting, next night's silence arrive less heavy. Stage did its job. The therapeutic mechanism operates through graduated exposure to existential anxiety. Each gaming session becomes inoculation against real-world uncertainty. teaching tolerance for ambiguity through repeated practice. Players learn to function while afraid, to make decisions despite incomplete information, to accept outcomes beyond personal control. The brain cannot distinguish between simulated and actual survival, filing both under experiential knowledge that builds resilience through fictional rehearsal. There is also computational sublime, systems too large to hold entirely in working memory that nevertheless yield to partial mastery. We navigate by maps and heuristics, like sailors steering by 3 stars. Dread emerges when system asserts its remainder, part you cannot know, without abandoning fairness. Dark matter in skill tree, cosmic microwave background in loot table. When game holds back like careful lecturer, we listen. This sublime manifests through complex systems that reward pattern recognition while maintaining opacity at deeper levels. Players develop intuitive understanding of game mechanics without achieving complete mastery, creating relationship analogous to scientific engagement with natural phenomena. The satisfaction comes not from total comprehension, but from functional navigation of incomprehensible systems. Effective cosmic horror games maintain this balance, revealing enough to enable play while preserving essential mystery. Culturally, we drown in data while starving for meaning. Mythos posture accepts Starfield and refuses horoscope, says, "Void is not yours, but you may sing under it." Offers paradox pair, key and gate, veil and void, that feels honest. In era of feigned certainty and crowded microphones, quiet backstage voice is relief. Contemporary information overload creates hunger for authentic engagement with uncertainty. Cosmic horror gaming provides counterpoint to algorithmic recommendation systems and social media echo chambers by embracing ambiguity as feature rather than bug. Players find relief in experiences that acknowledge limits of human understanding while still providing meaningful interaction. The genre offers honest relationship with mystery, neither denying its existence nor claiming false mastery over it. We also love the mask. Role-playing gives permission to explore selves. Horror gives permission to explore endings. In controlled theater, we are both audience and witness. We see ourselves choosing to look. We forgive ourselves for cost. We learn putting mask down gently. The mask metaphor extends beyond simple character creation into psychological experimentation with identity boundaries. Players safely explore aspects of personality normally suppressed or feared, using fictional frameworks to investigate personal responses to extreme situations. Horror gaming specifically allows exploration of mortality and vulnerability, topics typically avoided in daily life. The theatrical framework provides necessary distance for processing difficult emotions while maintaining personal safety. The Stanley Parable demonstrates this by making player complicity explicit. Narrator's frustration with player choice becomes part of experience. Spec Ops. The line uses military shooter mechanics to implicate player in war crimes, transforming familiar gameplay into moral horror. These games succeed by making comfort with mechanics become source of discomfort. Harm is managed because transgression is safe. Prayer whispered because house is ours. Water cold but not deep. Then, only then, we look up and notice stars. Digital spaces provide perfect laboratory for this controlled exposure because consequences are fictional while psychological effects are real. Echo of all this is modern and loud. Wikis as grimoires, patches as heresies, leaderboards as temple inscriptions. We will widen to this chorus but hold thought. Your next New Game Plus is secular right. You know this even if you won't say it. Curtain knows too. Live service games are temples with maintenance schedules. Calendar is liturgy. Patch notes are encyclicals. Players form congregations at reset, repeating rituals until rare mechanic falls like wafer. Mythos posture thrives here because hidden math and public weather intersect. Raid's choreography becomes communal diagram of dread. Stack, spread, cleanse, phase. Language, clinical, feeling, ancient. The transformation of gaming into service creates perfect environment for cosmic horror's procedural dread. Weekly resets establish ritual cadence while seasonal events mark liturgical calendar. Players gather at appointed times to perform complex choreographies against forces beyond individual comprehension. The language of raiding becomes clinical vocabulary for confronting incomprehensible entities. Each call out a line in inherited hymn sung against the dark. Destiny's darkness operates as cosmic principle rather than faction, paracausal force, that corrupts through proximity. Raids become liturgical performances where teams must execute precise movements to avoid annihilation. The Witness, Rolk, Oryx, these are not merely bosses but embodiments of universal principles. Final shape, dominance, taking, victory temporary because principle persists. Bungie's masterpiece demonstrates how live service structure amplifies cosmic horror themes. The darkness functions not as defeatable enemy, but as fundamental force requiring constant vigilance. Raid encounters become theological arguments expressed through mechanics. Teams must understand and counter alien logic to survive. The sword logic of the hive, the paracausal nature of light and dark. These concepts transform combat into philosophical confrontation, where victory over avatars never touches underlying principles. World of Warcraft's old gods demonstrate this liturgical approach. N'Zoth's corruption spreads through game systems themselves. Interface elements shift, audio distorts, familiar mechanics become unreliable. Players must perform specific rituals, interrupt sequences, and positioning dances to prevent reality itself from unraveling. The horror emerges from systems behaving incorrectly, trusted interfaces becoming untrustworthy oracles. Blizzard's implementation shows how cosmic horror can infect game mechanics directly. Players learn to distrust their own screens, questioning whether visual glitches represent bugs or cosmic interference. Success requires not just individual skill, but collective adherence to procedures designed to maintain reality's stability. Purification rituals performed through coordinated cleansing that becomes liturgical necessity. Beyond games themselves, metagame is library. Wikis accrue edits like coral, footnotes breeding footnotes, speculation fossilizing into canon and back. Build guides read like grimoires with permutations. Drop tables are tabulated prophecies. Discords function as covens, dev diaries as papal windows. Curtain perforated, backstage smokes out. The digital infrastructure creates distributed archive, where players become both researchers and archivists. Wiki pages accumulate layers of interpretation like sedimentary knowledge, while Discord servers function as real-time covens, sharing discoveries and theories. Build guides read like ritual manuals, complete with statistical prayers and optimization liturgies. The permeability between official and unofficial information creates atmosphere of collaborative investigation. The Secret World pioneered ARG elements that extend stage into streets and browsers. GPS becomes locus, QR codes become sigils. Communities learn solving not just puzzles but each other. Design flows from tabletop to web to phone and back. When done well, risk is social, not psychological. Cost is time, not sanity. When done poorly, cost feels like faith wasted. Control demonstrates modern ARG integration through Federal Bureau of Control documents that exist both in-game and as real websites, blurring boundaries between fictional and actual investigation. Players become researchers not just of game lore, but of transmedia narrative architecture, where object dossiers read like Sacred relic cards and hotline calls sound like confessions recorded in echoing nave. Streaming and VODs transform players into priests. Game is both scripture and sermon. Chat is choir. Horror becomes communal humming, safe at scale. Speedrunners turn systems inside out, performing computational sublime as dance. Mask replaced by muscle memory. Ritual is repetition toward transcendence. The streaming ecosystem creates new forms of cosmic horror spectatorship, where audiences participate in collective dread through chat interaction. Streamers become digital shamans guiding viewers through horror experiences, while speedrunners represent different engagement, computational sublime performed as athletic exhibition, where mastery over systems becomes transcendent art form. Developers learn staging silences, teasers feeling like runes scratched into bus stop ad, seasonal events hinting at deeper waters, patch notes whispering miscellaneous bug fixes and meaning mask fits better now. Language of maintenance is language of myth, constant, low, careful. Modern echoes are broad sea, reflecting original posture, knowledge that stains, curiosity that costs. Stage admitting it is stage, your role not passive. By playing, sharing, editing, watching, you widen circle. You teach next ritual. You are both audience and archivist. Curtain opens because you showed up on time. We are almost at end. Room is quiet. Fog has not lifted. It has settled. We return to where we began. Controller in hand. Screen like cold tide line under stars. Hold controller again. It is warm now, skin sharing heat with plastic in pact of small comfort. Look at screen. It is still sea. Pixels move like weather. Opening promise was forbidden knowledge without harm, bedtime story with teeth folded back. Did knowledge cost you? Only time you agreed to pay. Did idea act on you? Only as far as you chose to lift lantern and look. We traced line from paper to plastic, from dice to design patterns that look back. Watched rulebooks behave like grimoires, keepers like stage hands. Followed fanzines across age of terminals, through parsers and polygons, through cathedrals and crucibles, into calendars and wikis and wide dark of networks. At every turn, mythos posture remained. Knowledge as key and gate, veil and void, structure, not character, entities as principles, beginnings as veils. The transmission was never contamination, but invitation. Each medium discovered the same truth independently. Systems that reward curiosity while making curiosity dangerous create unique psychological tension. From Chaosium's sanity mechanics to Bloodborne's insight, from text parser responses to procedural generation algorithms, the pattern persists. Players learn to navigate by partial maps, accept fog as mercy, understand that honest games admit their own limitations while providing meaningful interaction. You are not outside this, never were. Self-implication is not twist, it is simplest fact. Every time you chose to examine, you paid. Every time you refused, you paid different. Your sanity bar in life does not tick down, but attention is finite. You spend it under fluorescent hymns and under star-silent skies. Your mask is face you present to game. Your mirror is face game returns. The horror was never in games. It was in recognition of your own appetite for unknown, willingness to trade comfort for revelation. Each session became rehearsal for larger questions. How much uncertainty can you tolerate? What price will you pay for understanding? When does investigation become compulsion? Games served as mirrors, reflecting not cosmic entities but human curiosity in its most naked form. The tabletop origins established ritual framework, shared transgression, collaborative descent into forbidden knowledge. Digital adaptations translated these rituals into solitary experiences that maintained communal elements through forums, wikis, streaming. AAA productions brought cosmic horror to mainstream audiences, while indies preserved experimental edge. Each platform, each evolution preserved essential DNA. Curiosity costs, knowledge stains, player becomes complicit. Call of Cthulhu's sanity mechanic begat Bloodborne's insight, amnesia's deteriorating perception, controls reality distortion. The family tree branches, but roots remain, psychological systems that make learning dangerous, that transform player from empowered hero to fragile investigator. The controller becomes ritual implement, screen becomes scrying glass, save file becomes grimoire recording your descent. Curtain falls softly here. There is no scream. There is thesis. Cosmic horror in games is rehearsal for humility. It teaches you will not own map, that fog is merciful, that your lantern is bright enough for next step, not one more. It asks you to love unknown as stage and ocean, to accept water at ankles as price of standing on this shore. The lesson was always practical. How to function in systems larger than comprehension, how to make decisions with incomplete information, how to find meaning in mystery rather than demanding explanation. Gaming cosmic horror provides safe space for practicing these essential skills, teaching tolerance for ambiguity that serves beyond entertainment. Outside this theater, cosmology widens. There are other cathedrals, pantheon of outer gods as design principles, masks of messenger, physics of procedural generation as theology of indifferent abundance. Next film will pull that curtain. For now, we let house lights rise slowly. We let fog keep its shape. We put mask down with care. And if you felt room breathe with you, if you heard quiet chorus in vents, if you carried little of this calm into sleep, then ritual worked. Audience was stage. Stage remembered you kindly. Sea stayed outside door. The game never truly ends. It continues in new forms, with new players exploring new territories of consciousness and reality. The eternal return ensures exploration continues. Questions remain alive. Mystery deepens rather than resolves. Perhaps that's most Lovecraftian insight. Journey itself is destination. Questions matter more than answers. Exploration of existence's mysteries is what makes existence meaningful.